Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. 9:13 a.m. exactly. News and views right here on Salam Media. So next we're going to be talking with Media Liaison Officer at KZN Emergency Medical Services, and that is Robert McKenzie. And it's about the situation on the ground. What does it look like? Is there relief getting two people affected quick enough? And just how dire is the situation? Robert McKenzie, very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on your show.
Okay, what does the ground look like as far as KZN and the recent rains are concerned? We know it was utter devastation last month with those floods, with the heavy rains and the floods. Do you think that people are a little better prepared this time around, including emergency services and other support services that are part of this whole loop? Or is it just that the rains were not as heavy as they were in, a little while ago?
It's a difficult question to answer. I don't have all the answers for you in terms of why it wasn't as severe as last time. It does appear that we had a similar amount of rain, and it was raining heavily over Saturday as well as Saturday night. It also rained through Sunday, but we didn't see the level of flooding that we saw last month. That was all, that horrific flood was still fresh in everybody's minds, and everyone was quite fearful. All the emergency services were quite worried and ready to respond. But fortunately, at a ground level, it wasn't as severe as it was last month. We did see some damage occurring up towards the north coast, near Mshlali, where there was some flooding of some flats and some buildings were severely damaged. And then in the rest of the eThekwini district, there was some localized flooding affecting some of the roads on Saturday night. And on Sunday, some of the roads were waterlogged. But from a KZN EMS perspective, from an ambulance service perspective, we didn't respond to any emergency cases where people had been injured or lost their lives, which is a great relief for everyone. You know, as much as it's horrific, a building or a car can be replaced or worked on, but the loss of human life is the ultimate price. And sadly, how these floods get measured. But fortunately, no fatalities or injuries that we know of as a result of it.
So, Robert, do you put this down to just being better prepared this time around? Or is it just that it was not as devastating as it was the last time around? I'm also wondering about, and I know that you are the Media Liaison Officer at KZN Emergency Medical Services, and some of the questions I may put to you may not be in your ambit of control to respond, or you may not feel that you could respond to them. But lots of things are playing out as we speak. I think one of the very big questions at the moment is the disaster relief funds that were put aside or earmarked for the rebuilding from the last floods. Do you know if any of those funds have been put in place and people are busy rebuilding their lives, or is that still very much a waiting game?
Well, like you mentioned, my delegation for being able to comment is solely in relation to what we respond to as an ambulance service. So if there's an incident and people are injured and we respond there and treat them, that's the delegation that I'm allowed to comment on. Your question goes slightly out of that, so I'd rather not answer it and have the proper role players be able to give the correct answer. I wouldn't want to give incorrect information. But like you said, people were still recovering from the last disaster. We are still in the recovery phase from that disaster. And I know of people who had their house damaged in the last floods, and they just managed to clean out and bought some paint, and then there was the news of this more flooding. So very fearful, and everyone was quite worried about it. As to why the impact was not as great, like I said, I think there was a similar amount of rain. I don't know the exact amount of rain that fell, But we didn't see the same amount of damage and flooding like we experienced last time.
Well, thank God for that. Perhaps people were just a little better prepared. And maybe as the authorities had requested people that were living in the low-lying areas to perhaps move up to the to higher ground. I trust I trust that did in fact take place. Uh, what about then? What are you seeing as KZN Emergency Medical Services? Are you guys coping with all of the call outs you're getting? And what does the situation look like at clinics and hospitals?
Mm. Well, like I say, due to there not being any, or that we know, or we didn't respond to any people who were injured as a result of the flood. So that helped us. However, like I have mentioned in the past, just because it's flooding doesn't mean that people are not getting sick with the normal types of medical conditions that we normally respond to. Remember, we're entering winter, so a lot of your respiratory conditions start to predominate in our caseload. Also, we do many inter-hospital transfers where we move a patient from one hospital to a higher level of care at another hospital. So that was the majority of the caseload that we have been doing over the weekend. And fortunately, we still did have access to majority of the areas. If it was blocked off, it was just temporary and the water subsided. And we still had access to all our health facilities to be able to transport patients to, which was helpful. And then I think people did heed warnings in terms of evacuating sooner rather than later. Like I said, the devastation is fresh in everybody's mind from last month. And as again, even myself and my colleagues, we've been puzzling amongst ourselves as to, last month we saw a similar amount of rain, but the damage was much worse. I don't know if it's because the waterways were opened up in the last flood or the damages happened in the last flood. I'm not sure. It would really be a subjective opinion, which I'd rather not opinionate on. But yeah, so like I said, majority of the cases that we've been responding to are a typical kind of caseload that we have, that we normally deal with on a day-to-day.
Do you think, as KZN Emergency Medical Services, you referred to entering the winter months, and we've been told that officially we are in stage 5 of COVID-19, the pandemic. There's a whole host of issues that you, as medical personnel, have to be aware of, and how are you guys going to mitigate against it? Obviously, the fifth wave is the one issue. Then we're hearing talk about water contamination, the E. coli in water, E. coli in the water systems. Is there enough and safe drinking water available in the area? And moving forward, that does then suggest that medical services are going to be overstretched if these things then rear its head.
Yeah, so what we do, what many people don't understand about emergency services, when you phone the emergency number 112, which is a national number, that number you can use whether you're wanting the ambulance, the police, the fire department, or the major emergency services. You can use that number for. You phone that number and you tell them you're wanting an ambulance in, for instance, Bloemfontein. Then they'll put you through to the ambulance services in Bloemfontein, and you'll speak to the call center for that emergency service. Now, what happens at the ambulance service is it's not a matter of first come, first serve. The first person who phones gets the ambulance first. What happens is we triage the call, and it's very frustrating to the callers sometimes, but what we do is we ask background questions. We ask more information about what is wrong with the patient. Including in that information is the caller's name, the patient's name, the cell phone number that we can contact them back on, as well as what their address and the landmark is, as well as relevant questions to the patient that they're phoning about. And why we do that is so that we can get a clearer picture of which patients appear to be worse and need medical attention first, and also what kind of assistance we need to send to them. So that is what we do with all our cases, and using that, we're able to triage and create a hierarchy of which cases are more important to be able to respond to first. And that is how we plan on dealing with the increased number of cases that we get in, finding out which patients need help first, and then sending them the appropriate resources, which may range from an advanced life support response vehicle and ambulance to merely arranging transport or transporting them between the health facilities. So that's a process that we have that's developed in South Africa as well as worldwide, that we stick to be able to triage and manage all the cases that come in.
Are you guys coping thus far? I can't even begin to imagine what it looked like last month with the flooding, but are you managing up to this point in time?
Yeah, we are managing. Like I said, what we do, we triage the calls and we take it from there to be able to get assistance to the people who need it first. Like I said, it's not a first phone, first get kind of service. Also, what we have to remind people of, irrespective of the emergency services, that it's emergency services. We battle many times with hoax calls. People phone through, pretend there's an emergency or make up a situation. We go to the scene and we find that there's nobody there, which is sadly very common. Another issue that we're battling with currently is, it's been well publicized, as well as the attacks on paramedics. People will phone in saying there's an emergency here. We go there and they'll end up attacking the paramedics. That's fearful for us as paramedics, number one. Number two, sometimes they damage or steal the vehicle. That means that vehicle is then out of service. It needs to get repaired. It needs to get replaced if it's stolen, which then further impacts the emergency services. So we'd like to ask for support from the community in terms of safeguarding paramedics in the areas. Like I said, from an EMS perspective and a paramedic perspective, it's very worrisome and troublesome when you have this constant fear in the back of your head of when you go, you think you're going to help somebody, and then they're actually just there to rob you and steal your stuff. Yeah, so that's a worrying, yeah, not just us in KZN, but across the country.
Yeah, this has been in the news for a while now, and you kind of wonder what sort of sick minds are out there that they call out paramedics on a hoax call, and then, as you say, when you get there, there's no emergency, there's no one around, or alternatively attacking the paramedics. And a lot of those cases were reported in the Western Cape. Let's hope and pray that common sense does prevail. How do you want the general public or communities to be of assistance to the medical services and paramedics as a whole?
I think what the best way that they can do is monitor their family members and their colleagues, know what's happening with their relatives. I'm talking about a family type group now, so that if they do need medical assistance, they don't leave it to the last minute, and when it becomes an emergency, rather be proactive, or even if necessary, before it becomes an emergency, go via the clinic or the hospital before it becomes an emergency and needing to call the ambulance. So just be active participants in your own health as well as your family's health to be able to manage your health conditions. Remember, in South Africa, we have many preventable health conditions. Just the other day, we were highlighting hypertension or high blood pressure. And that's still a major cause for mortality in South Africa, is people with high blood pressure. And that's a condition that can be managed very effectively by diet as well as healthcare, medications, and dietary inputs to be able to manage that condition, because it leads to many conditions which are life-threatening, but yet it's easily manageable, easily preventable and manageable once it does occur. Another one is diabetes. It's got a very high mortality rate in this country, and yet it is manageable. It's difficult to manage, and it's very frustrating for the patients who do have it, but it is manageable. And managing your health, your lifestyle, and the diseases that you have can go a far way to preventing emergencies and hospitalizations further down the line.
Robert McKenzie, lovely talking to you. Hope and pray that you guys keep safe and really pleased to hear that the situation is bad, but not as dire in KZN as it was with the last floods that saw such utter devastation and loss of life. Take care, God bless, and thank you for talking to us.
More than a pleasure.
It is 9:29 exactly. In a minute or two, we will be bringing you our next interview, and that, of course, is with Hosai Ahmedzai, a journalist and news anchor at Shamshad News in Afghanistan.